The Chemist Shop Trip. A Belladonna Trip Report by Angelica. Uploaded to earwid.org on April 19th, 2008. I was 15 years old when I tried Belladonna for the first time, and last until now. Although when I did it, I was not exactly sure of what I was doing. I was in my mother's chemist shop, where I was working for the summer. It was at 2:30 in the afternoon when she went to have a lunch break and left me alone at the chemist shop. I knew she'd return at 5:30 approximately. Generally, my mother trusted me, and of course, didn't know that every time she left I would spend my time experimenting with explosive substances, e.g. natrium in water in the backyard, and I'd gladly watch which would make the biggest bang. I'd also try out essential oils and perfumes on my skin, and once had found and eaten a Lexatanil codeine pill. So there I was, once again, opening strange bottles of various substances and experimenting their use. All of it seemed extremely amazing to my teenage eyes. Suddenly, in a back shelf I had never noticed before, I found 3 bottles. One of it was labelled Belladonna Tincture, another Ibogaine, and the last one, Neroli Essential Oil. Not having a clue about what might be the first two, I judged, brightly, from the third, that there must be some sort of perfume. Some information about Belladonna had also dropped to my attention, e.g. that the witches would use it for some sort of flying, and that the Roman ladies would put it in their eyes to make them shine. So I opened the bottle, which was never opened before, and smelled it a bit. The smell was beautiful, intoxicating and rich. I decided there was nothing wrong with applying some tincture on my skin, so I did. I applied a lot on my arms and neck. It was about 3 o'clock then. At about half an hour later I started feeling tired and dizzy, although as I hadn't slept at all the previous night, I accused that for my condition. In that state of mind, I wondered how would Belladonna taste. I thought everything was okay as long as I did not apply Belladonna in my eyes. Boy, was I smart. So, I put some on my hand and licked it from it. It had the strong taste of alcohol every tincture has, plus a bad, really bad taste. I drank some water to make the taste go away. A bit later on I felt cold. It was around 30 degrees outside, but I thought at the time being cold was normal. So I put on my jacket and went to the couch to get some sleep. From that point and then, I totally lost count of the sense of time. To my mind, 1 second later, I decided I wasn't feeling sleepy at all and woke up. I was absolutely certain that I had woken up and walked around the room. The room was filled with strange colours that, even now, I have problems describing them exactly. For some reason I saw absolutely no problem with it. I continued walking towards the front room of the chemist shop, where the sales are made from, until now I was in the back room, where we keep the medicine in stock. This was when I suddenly realised that the ceiling was coming towards me. I took a better look and understood that my feet weren't on the ground, and that it was me that was flying towards the ceiling. I was extremely scared, thinking I would bang my head on it. Carefully, I walked into the front room, and to my biggest surprise of all, I saw my mother in work, having returned from the lunch break, selling medicine to some blurry entities. I couldn't make out what they were. I was shocked, as I was afraid of what on earth she was supposed to think seeing me flying above her head. Of course, she did not see me. I took a look at the front clock and saw the hour. It was 7:30 in the afternoon. Being sure that from lying on the couch till the time being, only 2 or 3 minutes could have passed, I actually came to the realisation of the fact that there was something terribly wrong with me. Having not had such previous hallucinogenic experiences, I could understand nothing of my condition. I was certain everything was real, that I was not dreaming or dead. From the point I saw the hour, and then I remember the shock, such as a shock from a fall, to returning into my physical body, feeling nothing but thirsty. I opened the tab and drank lots and lots of water. My skin was itching. Took off my jacket and my arms, and my neck was all red. Maybe also from the alcohol or other substances in the tincture that irritate the skin. I know not if I can plainly accuse Belladonna of that though. I washed off the smell with tons of water. To my surprise, when I saw my watch, the hour was indeed a bit past of 7:30. I felt petrified knowing that my mother would be here already, and I was curious as to why she did not know anything of my condition. Later on, she indeed came in and told me that she saw me sleeping before and did not want to wake me up. Quickly I hid the 3 bottles, and when she saw the water all over me and the red arms and neck, I made up an excuse of having accidentally touched a plant in the garden, one that is very similar with one I am allergic to. She felt pity for me and sent me home with my dad and some antihistamine medicine. The 3 days that followed, I cannot remember a lot besides that I was unwell, but manageably, and that my vision was a blur. I stayed in bed with the allergy excuse. After about a week or so, I was okay, suffering from no side effects and having tons of question marks inside my head as to what it was all about. I was fascinated by the reality I had witnessed and eager to do it again sometime, until I made some research for the plant on the internet and found out how toxic it really is, and how lucky I was I only had the symptoms above. I also was extremely lucky that my parents did not understand, and that no one had any helpful ideas about taking me to the hospital. Some months later, I also asked my mother, telling her I randomly discovered Belladonna and Ibogaine at the shop, and asked her what they were. She told me that when she opened the pharmacy it was obligatory for all the pharmacists to have them, and she was uncertain concerning their use. For Belladonna, she stated it was a kind of antidote to mushroom poisoning, and for Ibogaine, it was some kind of medicine for tropical diseases. Well, this was my experience. I certainly learned a lot from it, and if I could go back in time, I wouldn't change having had it at all. But I was much more responsible in the future of any substances I experimented with. I'd be afraid to repeat the experience after all I know of Belladonna now. I was lucky once, but I'll not be always. As of my mother, I know not anything of her relationship with the substances. I truly tried to find out about it for a lot of years and from a lot of sources, but I didn't come to any safe conclusion. Then, after I had asked, checked for the bottles in the back shelf, they were, of course, gone. Along with the neroli essential oil, if of course this was actually the content of the bottle. It seems that mothers do indeed protect their secrets. A 1000 UG trip report by Pretty Mushy, uploaded to the Shroomery forums 7 years and 10 months ago. I see a lot of people looking for LSD and wanting to take more and more. I have a lot of experience and searched long and hard for good stuff. My reasoning at the beginning was if I have to take more than 5 to get nice visuals, it was weak as hell. I spent multiple months doing and finding better and better stuff, till one day I met a man who told me, "Be careful with this. This is laid how it was back in the day, it's no joke." Before this I had taken 5 strips, 10 strip, 20 strips. I knew this stuff was strong because off of one I had very intense visuals and a strong body and nice warping. This is my story of 5. This report has been mostly edited for easier reading. A lot more went on than what is described below, but so much happened I don't always remember every detail. It comes in waves. You need to first test that it is real, then test the strength of each dose. This, with a test kit, came back dark purple. I took 5 hits of LSD and had slight warping already at around 15 minutes in, and at about 30 minutes, the ceiling was tearing away from the wall. My girlfriend started talking to me asking if something, well, I'm not quite sure what it was at the time because her face started turning into puzzle pieces. There were dark outlines around each piece, and as I looked really hard at her face, the pieces started to explode, showing the flesh underneath the puzzle, and then starting to reform back on her face. She then said, "Hey," I kind of snapped out of it and I could hear, "Do you mind if I use this pipe?" But as I started to look into her eyes, they transformed into nebulas, and I could see into the abyss of space through her eyes. I never did answer her, because my world was being turned upside down. We went inside and she started painting on a canvas. She asked me to pass her the paint, and I put my fingers in it and tried to give her it on my fingers. After this, I went to the other side of the room and noticed I was sweating. So I wiped my forehead off with my hand and noticed all the sweat was turning to gold. Then everything I touched turned into pure gold, soft and flaky. So I started picking things up and throwing them across the room, breaking everything, saying, "It doesn't matter, it's turning into gold, we're rich." She got me to sit down and tried to get me to meditate. So I sat down and got in a position, took a deep breath, and all of a sudden I was in a test tube, a bit like in the Matrix, with fields of people all around me. A bunch of reptiles was staring at me, and I could feel something like a wire coming from the back of my head. So I ripped it out and jumped up screaming, "Nah, fuck this, fuck this, fuck this." As I got up and started walking, my back fence turned into morphing reptiles. There were hundreds under the ground I was walking on as well. They were making up everything around me. My girlfriend stood in front of me and turned into one of these reptiles. I teleported to a bird's eye view of the neighbourhood, and they were telling me how they were informing the human population slowly, and plotting down new houses and neighbourhoods to give each person that was enlightened a new house. I then teleported down into one of the neighbourhoods, and there were thousands of people all around me congratulating me on becoming one of the enlightened ones. For the people who couldn't be there, they had television cameras and were broadcasting live the events to other people who had been enlightened as well. They told me everyone on the other side would be successful in everything they did. There was no poverty or suffering on the other side. There was a point during the trip that I had teleported to outside the universe, and God told me I had to create a new one. He gave me a display with all the options, and it was so overwhelming I didn't know what to do. I tried to add planets, then think that they were wrong, backtracking again and placing planets in other spots. When I came back from that, someone told me I would only be at peace if I watched my girlfriend die, because she was going to die someday anyways, and she needed to come to the other side. As I heard this, I looked at her, and her neck slit wide open, and blood started pouring out. She said, "Why? Why are you doing this to me?" I then teleported to a jail cell where people were telling me I had just killed my girlfriend. I was sitting in the corner of the cell covered in blood with people staring at me. One was playing a Game Boy. What the fuck? I ended up teleporting back, so I tried to go to the bathroom and only half my dick was there. As I was pissing, I pissed blood. I got so frightened that I couldn't even go back to the restroom. By the end of the trip, I had hallucinated that my stomach had been slit open, and I watched my intestines fall out of my body as I tried to put pressure on the wound and keep them in. I had seen someone run over to me with a piece of glass, sit down next to me, and cut my ballsack wide open. After my peak, I came to in a pool of blood, butt-ass naked. I had shattered multiple bottles and was walking in glass the whole time. The next day, I went back to the location and none of the blood was real. I got into my girlfriend's paint and wiped circles of paint all over the floor where I was in a circle. I was in complete shock for one full day after. I couldn't say more than 2 words at a time, and I didn't comprehend language enough to speak. The trip lasted a total of 12 hours. I came out of the peak around hour 10. From hour 1 to 10, the world as we know it did not exist, and I only had brief moments of reality. Your sitters are demons, plotting against you, really just trying to take you home. You hear them plotting back and forth about what to do with you. 6 months later, I took 1.5 of the same stuff, and it brought me right back to the same level trip, watching a comet hurl towards the sun and explode, creating a black hole in front of my eyes. Know yourself, know your substance, know your sources, people. Things can go bad very quickly if it's potent, and you should be prepared for this. And as always, good vibes. I want to start this story by giving a little backstory and providing some context and maybe some reason for why these events unfolded the way they did. For a year before this event, I used heroin every day. Needless to say, I was very addicted, sometimes consuming over a gram a day. That's about $60 a day. One day, after multiple quitting attempts, I decided I would double down and attempt to cold turkey off of this substance. I planned to use kratom and THC oil tea to lighten the withdrawal effects. While this may have been a rational or even optimal way to overcome the withdrawal symptoms for some, it turned out to be a complete nightmare for me. The THC was already prepared by my stepmother, who has disliked me due to recent events related to my addiction. I asked her for some of the tea she had prepared, assuring me that it was mild, as I have no tolerance to THC at the time, and I'm prone to pretty severe cannabis anxiety. She gives me a large coffee cup full of this THC oil-infused beverage, and I proceed to drink it. I was about halfway through the cup when I started to notice the effects. Recognising it as typical effects of THC, I didn't pay much attention to it. Until about 30 minutes afterwards, I started to feel very dissociated and confused. I felt as though my surroundings were becoming increasingly distant and unfamiliar, similar to a moderate dose of ketamine. My heart rate began to increase and panic began to take hold. I decided to walk around to calm my increasingly overwhelming anxiety symptoms. This was when I began to notice some severe visual distortions. Every object I walked towards seemed to grow, rather than get closer and vice versa. This effect happens on psilocybin quite frequently for me, but at least I can rationalise that as psilocybin just being psilocybin. I couldn't explain this at all. It didn't seem possible for THC to be so potent. Time began to come to an almost standstill, and this is where the nearly indescribable physical symptoms started to take effect. I no longer felt connected to my body in any meaningful way whatsoever. My sense of touch completely disappeared, and an intense, all-encompassing pins and needles overtook me. Whenever I touched the surface, it felt like I was going through the object. I was horrified, and could not make sense of what was happening to me at the time. I tried to calm myself, but there was absolutely nothing I could do. I felt like I was trapped in a never-ending loop of suffering. How could such a benign drug such as THC do such a thing? Had my stepmother laced me? Was I going insane? These thoughts began looping over and over in my head until I couldn't take it anymore. I ended up dialing 911. However, this wasn't an easy task because I could no longer feel my hands or have an accurate idea of how to operate a phone. Things became increasingly blurry from here, but I managed to dial 911. It took about 7 minutes to arrive, but this felt like forever, and I was losing my shit. Once the paramedics arrived, they put me on a stretcher and began asking me what I had taken. I had a feeling they didn't believe I had only taken THC, but this could have been due to severe paranoia. They had me breathe through a straw to calm down, but this didn't last for long until I was overwhelmed with a sense of cosmic dread. I remember closing my eyes at one point and feeling like I was falling back into eternity. I felt like I was trapped in an infinite loop of ineffable torture. My body felt like it was being pulled apart in every direction. I was completely losing my grasp on reality. I began screaming at the top of my lungs and fighting for my life. This terrified the paramedics, and they threatened to call the police if I didn't stop. It was out of my control though. They ended up strapping me down and giving me oxygen. At one point on this infinitely long, horrific hospital ride in the ambulance, I opened my eye and felt like I was in a completely foreign reality. The paramedics appeared to me as some alien entities, and the environment seemed to me as some sort of spacecraft. I thought they were performing experiments on me, and I felt like the hospital bed was some object used to crucify people. I felt like some entities were crucifying me. There are no words in the human language to describe the pain and fear I felt at that moment. I was mortified. There was no doubt in my mind that this would last for eternity. Finally, we arrived at the hospital. I began demanding the staff to give me benzos to help calm me down. I was furious at them for not giving them to me right then and there. I was cursing at them with every vulgar word I could think of. They eventually gave me an IV with Ativan. I can only remember bits and pieces after this, but I do remember vague images of them coming into the hospital room and asking me questions. I ended up waking about 14 hours later, covered in blood and bruises. I'd torn my IV out in a fit of rage and gotten blood all over the place. Aside from feeling a bit spaced out, I felt pretty normal, and they proceeded to discharge me. Looking back, I don't believe my tea was laced with anything other than THC, but I do think it had something to do with the fact that I was going through heroin withdrawals and that my mental health at the time was pretty out of balance. We seem to underestimate the power of THC. The effects of drugs are entirely subjective from individual to individual, but I would not recommend taking such a high dose of anything psychedelic in a bad state of mind. An encounter with negative entities, or dark beings. An LSD trip report by Gregory 1 from the Actualize.org forum. A few weeks ago I had an intense encounter with negative entities, or dark beings. I encountered them in my 11th LSD trip, and got some insights that I think might be worth sharing with you. I hope you'll enjoy. Before I share my experience, I would like to add that there is a higher reality that encompasses everything that could ever exist. I am God, and as God, I have created everything, including all aliens that could ever influence me. Someone who wants to live in truth must understand the following. As God, you have responsibility for all experiences, including painful and traumatizing ones. You have to take full ownership of all of them. Now to my experience. Before I explain what happened to me, let me say the following. The experience I had seemed to be as real, if not realer than ordinary physical reality. Therefore, my conclusion is that this psychic attack I experienced could be shared by other humans and is as real as what we refer to as physical reality. I had my 11th LSD experience at around 300 micrograms. Usually LSD experiences for me come with great clarity. If the dose would be high enough, I would always realise my oneness with everything. Realise that I am God and that God is love. I would in great clarity understand the purpose of existence and of life. I never had any visual hallucinations, never had any disturbances, and never had any physical uncomforts or pain. This time, everything was different. I was on the edge, 1 second away from God realization, when I experienced strange words moving through my consciousness. I heard words that I did not know existed, that I have never heard. It felt like foreign voices were in my head, distracting me from realizing that I was God. It felt like somebody, or some entity was trying to manipulate my state of consciousness. I never heard any words or anything weird before when I took LSD. It seemed to me that God realization corresponds to a certain frequency of consciousness. Another frequency was interfering with my usual frequency, which was keeping me away from coming to a God frequency. I was in a state of utter confusion because my consciousness was being manipulated. It felt like I was physically being attacked, but on a consciousness level. I fought it and it realised that if I use my willpower I can still realise God. I tried to use my will, but something really frightening happened. The dark entities that tried to manipulate my consciousness were creating pain. Intense pain. Physical pain. The more truthful I became, the more transparent to God, the closer I came to seeing the truth, the more pain they would induce into my body. At a sudden point, the pain got so strong that I felt like I couldn't take it anymore. It felt like if I wouldn't stop it now, I would literally, physically die. The dark beings had shared a message with me. It was clear. They said,
"Live your life as a human being and stop looking for truth or for God, and you won't get in trouble. If you continue searching for God, life will get really, really difficult for you. We will manipulate everything in order to torture you and make you feel pain. On the other hand, if you give up, we will help you to live your ordinary life, manipulate some humans in order for you to have it easy, and you will be able to live a comfortable life, have a nice woman and a nice family. No need to worry about money, etc."
I wanted God. I wanted truth. I was strong. I said no to them. I fought back. The pain got unbearable. They took control over my body, and my body fell to the ground and twisted and curled up in pain. I gave up. I stopped looking for God and started trying to obey the aliens' will. Immediately the pain stopped. I said to the aliens, "I give up. I'll never do psychedelics again. I'll live my human life and stop asking questions. But one thing I will remember. I'll remember how weak I was. I will remember that I was weak, that I gave up, that I wasn't willing to die and to suffer for truth. I will never be arrogant again, and always try to see God in the faces of all other people in my life. Always try to see the best in them." After the trip, I realised that I made a mistake. These aliens or negative entities can only present you with illusions. The illusion they presented me with was that I could physically die. They did this by causing my body pain. However, death is impossible, since I am God. The aliens manipulated me with illusions, and I believed their illusions. Therefore, I used my own free will to serve evil, which I shouldn't have done. I should have surrendered to the pain and died, and in dying I would have realised that death is impossible, and that I am God creating myself, including the aliens. However, I gave up, and therefore didn't fully utilise this trip. What I know now is that there are negative beings or dark entities that only care for power or controlling other beings. They do so because they are detached from love and from God, and therefore their greatest fear is that other beings could realise love, could realise the holy truth of all of existence, namely the sentence, "I am God." These beings would do all in their power to stop people from realising that I am God, because once you realise that, you become all-powerful, and these beings will lose all their power. I'm sure that these negative entities were indeed aliens. I did not see them in form of physical bodies, but I felt their power and their manipulation of my consciousness. They do exist in the same way that the walls of my house exist, as part of God, as part of physical reality, and as part of consciousness. However, nothing in this existence, including consciousness manipulating aliens, can have powers over you, since you are God, the creator of even the consciousness manipulating aliens. To truly understand what it means to be God, God has to forget that he is God, and has to believe that death is a real thing, and then be willing to physically die for his highest truth. This is the reason why God even creates such awful and evil creatures. They give him the opportunity to experientially understand what it truly means to be God, and what it truly means to be good. True goodness is if you are willing to physically die and suffer just for goodness sake. Next time I encounter aliens, I hope I will be strong enough to keep saying I love you to them. If I say it long enough until I physically die, the aliens will cease to exist, and all that remains will be God, or infinite love. I cannot comprehend what happened. A Salvinorin B ethomethyl ether trip report by Jomo, uploaded to earwid.org on May 2nd, 2019. This is stronger than anything you can imagine. To start off, I have many years of experience in chemistry. My job involves it, and I was always interested in it as a kid. Of course, I studied it in college. I've never really synthesized any drugs for my own use though, so this was a first. I heard of Salvinorin B ethoxymethyl ether online and did some research. After a few hours of work, I devised a synthesis method. The next day I ordered some salvia leaves. They arrived in about a week. I quickly extracted the Salvinorin A and put it in a small vial. I went to my makeshift lab in my garage and got to work. It took a few hours, but I finally ended up synthesizing Salvinorin B ethoxymethyl ether from Salvinorin A, or at least I assumed. The next day I brought it to work and performed gas chromatography, mass spectrometry on the substance. It was Salvinorin B ethoxymethyl ether. Excited to likely be one of the first to experience this compound, I put the rest of the material in my bag and went home a few hours later. While I was excited to experiment, I remembered my previous experiences with salvia and became a little hesitant. But I realised how rare this compound is. It needs to be experimented with. I measured out 50 UG and smoked it. No effects. Then 100 UG. Slight buzz. No effects other than that. I then decided to throw in 275 UG. I took the hit. I held it. Within 5 seconds I ended up feeling something. My knees started warping and stretched out about 20 feet and went through the door. I stood up and my head blasted through the ceiling, and before I knew it I was standing above my city. I could see each and every person doing their thing. I tried to bend down and look further, and reappeared in my house before disappearing and falling through my floor into an endless array of eerie sounds. I eventually reached the bottom and felt my body hit the ground. A creature walked toward me and grabbed me by the neck and said,
"You better know what you're doing,"
in a disturbing voice. Then he threw me and I landed. I stood up and realised I was in the 1950s. The trip went from impossible events to me simply existing in a different time. Walked around on this street and found a newspaper on the ground. I could read each and every article. At the top it read August 6, 1953. I didn't know that it wasn't real. It was all that I knew. I could remember my life, but it wasn't mine. It was the life of the person that I was in 1953. I could remember my childhood, school years, first job, everything. I went into a restaurant. I walked to the counter and asked for a hot dog. The woman said no problem, and I sat down. A few minutes later she brought over my order. I began to bite in before I saw that instead of a hot dog between buns, it was my real self, wiggling between the bread. I freaked out, but didn't know who it was. I was wondering what was going on, because I felt like something was wrong in the person that I was during this time. I then began to feel lightheaded, and everything went black. I then rolled over, and I was back to reality. I had no idea who I was, what anything was. My ceiling was falling apart and breaking into little pieces everywhere. Anything that I looked at had a face and smiled at me. About 10 minutes later, most of this subsided, and I realised what happened. My mind was blown. This was an infinite amount stronger than my strongest experience on Salvia. I went and looked at my clock. Nearly 3 hours had passed. That's about all I have to say. If I experiment with it anymore, I'll be sure to write more reports. However, that is unlikely for now, because I truly cannot comprehend what happened.